2 centuries ago, the Royal Navy nearly dominated the world's oceans. Backed by a global empire that its ships had to build and defend, the Navy maintained a two-navy standard. That is, it strove to be at least as strong as the next 2 navies combined. Today, Britain's fleet, naval and auxiliary, numbers just 73 ships and displaces less than 1 million tons. That makes it a ninth the size of the US, a third the size of China's and Russia's, and barely larger than Japan's, which has no global mission. But there is a chance, however small, to reverse 200 years of naval decline. The autocratic chaos of the United States under President Donald Trump, in particular his abandonment of Europe and Ukraine in favor of closer ties with Russia, has forced European countries to get serious about their own defense. In London, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has pledged to increase Britain's military spending from the current 2.3% of gross domestic product to 2.5% by 2027. The goal, he says, is for Britain to spend 3% of GDP on its armed forces by 2035. In the short term, that would generate an extra $17 billion a year for troops, equipment, and operations. How much the Royal Navy would gain, and what it might do with the potential windfall, remains to be seen. The Royal Navy should get the lion's share, positioning the British fleet to reclaim some of its former glory and expand maritime security across Europe. The Royal Navy could become Europe's navy. That makes sense. Britain is an island nation, and historically its prosperity and security have depended on control of the seas, said Pete Sandman, director of Navy Lookout, a trade publication. In general, European powers should concentrate on building up their land forces while Britain protects the maritime side. For Britain, expanding its fleet is a better investment than, say, a major expansion of the tiny British Army. The British Army is in a terrible state, largely of its own making, and we should not waste more resources trying to rebuild BOR, the British Army of the Rhine in Cold War Germany, or a new army of the Vistula in Poland. The Army needs at least 40,000 more men to be considered a truly meaningful force, but in the current climate, recruiting and retaining that number is unrealistic, Sandman said. If the RN could recruit and retain another 2,000 or so, that would be transformational. The extra men would be a crucial first step toward a bigger Royal Navy. Fleet planners have unexpectedly retired or decommissioned several ships in recent years, including prized frigates, amphibious assault ships, and support ships. Not because they are unfit to maintain, but because of a shortage of personnel in a demoralized fleet that has struggled to attract and retain enough new recruits that a realistic plan for a bigger, better fleet. One that pays better and values the work-life balance demands of the best professional sailors, could reverse the hiring crisis.